Chisako Kakehi. Back in December 2013, a 75-year-old Kyoto local sat down for a quiet dinner with his wife. They'd barely been married for 2 months. He actually found her through a matchmaking agency, and honestly, the whole evening seemed totally ordinary. But right after they finished eating, his heart just stopped. Within an hour, he was dead. Then the autopsy happened, and it changed the entire story. They found lethal levels of cyanide in his system. It was in his heart, his blood, and even his stomach. The man was Isao Kakehi, and that woman sitting across from him at dinner, she'd been planning this from day one. Her name was Chisako Kakehi, born in 1946 in southwestern Japan. She tied the knot for the first time in 1969. She was only 23. That first marriage lasted 25 years until he died of an illness in 1994. After that, something in her just shifted. She started hitting up matchmaking agencies to find new guys, but she was incredibly specific about what she wanted. Old, rich, and no kids. Love wasn't the goal here, she was hunting for targets. Over the next 20 years, a shocking number of her romantic partners ended up dead under some really shady circumstances. Her method was scary simple. Kakehi used to work at a printing plant, which is where she snagged the potassium cyanide stuff normally used for industrial printing. She'd crush the cyanide into a fine powder and stuff it into empty vitamin capsules. Since her older partners already popped a handful of supplements every single day, those poisoned ones blended right in. They would just swallow the pill, thinking it was another one of their vitamins. Death came minutes or hours later. How many times did she pull this off before someone finally noticed? The trail goes way back. In December 2007, she gave a cyanide pill to Toshiaki Suehiro, a 78-year-old she owed nearly 48 million yen. He collapsed barely 15 minutes after taking it. Somehow, he survived, but he ended up with permanent brain damage and couldn't see properly anymore. He died about 18 months later of something else. But get this, when the ambulance showed up, Kakehi gave them a fake name. In March 2012, she went after Masanori Honda. He was 71, fit, and loved hanging out at sports clubs. Honda blacked out while riding his motorcycle around 5 p.m. and was pronounced dead within 2 hours. Investigators later found out Kakehi was already shopping for new men through agencies 2 months before she even killed Honda. She pocketed about 16 million yen from that one. Next up was Minoru Hioki in September 2013. He'd survived lung cancer and was actually doing pretty well at the time. They had dinner, and then Kakehi handed him a cyanide capsule. When the medics arrived, she lied and said he was terminal with no family, then blocked them from trying to save him. He was dead within 2 hours. Barely 2 months later, she married Isao Kakehi, the man whose death would finally bring her whole world crashing down. The probe into Aizo's death blew everything wide open. Police found empty pill capsules right there in her apartment. The real smoking gun? They found a plastic bag with traces of cyanide buried in a potted plant at Aizao's place. She'd tried to hide it there. On November 19, 2014, Kakehi was finally arrested in Kyoto. She walked away with over 1 billion yen, somewhere between $6 and $9 million from insurance and inheritance. But she blew most of that fortune on bad investments and failed trades. Her trial at the Kyoto District Court was one of the longest Japan had ever seen. At first, she said she was innocent. Then, in July 2017, she confessed. But 2 days later, she took it all back, claiming she didn't even remember saying it. Her lawyers tried to argue she had dementia and wasn't responsible for her actions. Then came November 7th. In 2017, Judge Ayako Nakagawa handed down a death sentence, calling her crimes cold and calculated. The High Court stood by that in 2019. The Supreme Court shut down her final appeal on June 29, 2021. On December 26, 2024, guards found Kakehi slumped over in her cell at the Osaka detention house. A doctor confirmed she was gone at 10 a.m. She was 78. Kakehi used vitamins to kill quietly. But the next woman on our list? Her plan was way more elaborate. She built a whole life out of lies to trap lonely men who never saw it coming. Kanae Kijima. On August 5, 2009, Yoshiyuki Ueda posted a blog entry that became the most bone-chilling part of this whole case. He wrote about being 41 and finally looking forward to marriage, mentioning he was meeting his partner's family that very day. Within 24 hours, his body was found inside a rental car in Fukushima, Saitama. No keys in the ignition. No charcoal dust on his hands. Not even a single matchbox inside the vehicle. The scene was set up to look like a suicide, but the physical evidence told a completely different story. The woman Ueda had been dating was Kanae Kijima, born in 1974 in a small Hokkaido town called Nakashibetsu. She was the eldest of 4. After high school, she moved to Tokyo for Toyo University, though she would later lie and claim she attended the prestigious University of Tokyo. She dropped out only months later because she didn't pay her tuition fees. Her criminal history started young. As a teenager, she and a boyfriend stole 8 million yen from an acquaintance, earning her probation. She was busted for shoplifting makeup in 1999 and then books the following year. By 2003, she got a suspended sentence for scamming 10 different Yahoo Japan auction bidders out of 1.3 million yen. But deception was where Kijima truly shone. She fabricated an elaborate high society life on various marriage hunting and dating websites. She posed as a luxury living piano teacher and food coordinator, driving a rented Mercedes while claiming her father taught at the University of Tokyo. She used her domestic skills and charm to reel in lonely, vulnerable men who were desperate for a real connection. What did she do once they finally trusted her? She'd grind up sleeping pills into meals like beef stew, then use charcoal briquettes to fill the room with lethal carbon monoxide. Kijima deliberately took advantage of a grim reality. Charcoal-related deaths were so common in Japan that they were almost never investigated with any real suspicion. Ueda wasn't her first. In January 2009, 53-year-old Takao Tada was found dead in his home from carbon monoxide. 17 million yen had already been moved into Kijima's bank account before he even passed away. Autopsy results showed over 10 times the standard dose of sleeping medication inside his body. Strangely, there was almost zero charcoal powder found in his throat. That's impossible for someone voluntarily inhaling smoke. Then, in May 2009, 80-year-old Kenzo Ando died. He was an elderly man from Noda. He died in a house fire with drugs in his system, while Kijima was caught on camera withdrawing 1.9 million yen after his death. The court decided she killed him because she was terrified he would realize she'd been stealing his money. Ueda, the man who blogged about his wedding excitement, sent Kijima 5 million yen before he was found in that rental car. Police found a mortar and pestle with drug traces in her home, along with prescriptions from 10 different doctors. The 100-day trial at the Saitama District Court was the longest lay judge case in the history of Japan. The entire case for the prosecution was built on a mountain of circumstantial evidence. There was no confession, no eyewitnesses, and no direct forensic proof of the exact moments they died. On April 13, 2012, Kijima became the first woman to receive a death sentence under the new jury system. Higher courts upheld the ruling, and in 2017, the Supreme Court confirmed it, calling her acts intentional and extremely malicious. As of 2025, Kijima is still on death row at the Tokyo detention house. She has married twice while in prison and keeps a blog that is regularly updated by her supporters. She has never once admitted to any of the crimes. Her life inspired the best-selling novel Butter by Asako Yuzuki, which became a #1 bestseller in its 2024 translation. How many more men would have died if she hadn't been caught when she was? Kijima hunted her victims one by one, working in private settings behind locked doors. But what happens when the poison hits a whole community at once, and nobody realizes what's happening until it's way too late? Masumi Hayashi. July 25th, 1998, a summer festival was being held in the Sonobe district of Wakayama City. Around 200 neighbors from the local association had gathered for the event, where about 20 women volunteered to cook up communal curry in massive outdoor pots. It was supposed to be a day of celebration. They started serving the food around 6 in the evening as families lined up with their plates. Within just a few hours, people started dropping. 67 people ended up eating the poisoned food. 4 of them would never wake up again. The victims who didn't make it included the council president, Takatoshi Tanaka, who was 64, Vice President Takahaki Tanaka, aged 53, and two young kids from the neighborhood, Hyotaka Hayashi and Miyuki Tori. 63 others were hit with acute arsenic poisoning, suffering through everything from violent nausea and seizures to permanent organ damage. Forensic teams later found at least 130 grams of arsenic acid dumped into those curry pots. That is a terrifying amount of poison. This wasn't some kitchen mishap or accidental contamination. Someone had deliberately set out to murder an entire neighborhood. Detectives eventually focused all their attention on one woman, Masumi Hayashi, born July 22, 1961. A mother of 4 who used to sell insurance. Hayashi lived with her husband Kenji, who ran a termite control business. That job gave the family easy access to huge amounts of arsenic. But this actually wasn't the first time the Hayashi family had been linked to that specific chemical. Long before the tragedy at the summer festival, the couple had been running a massive insurance scam, intentionally poisoning themselves and friends with arsenic to cash in over 150 million yen. Arsenic was their weapon of choice way before that summer. So, could this woman have taken things even further? The state's case against Hayashi was built purely on circumstantial evidence, and she has never once admitted to the crime. A high schooler testified that she saw Hayashi prowling around the curry pots like a bear while the others were busy cooking. Hayashi was the only person left alone with those pots for over 40 minutes, and the only one who didn't get sick afterward. Scientists at the Spring 8 Synchrotron Radiation Lab performed forensic tests that supposedly matched the chemical signature of the arsenic in her home to the poison found in the curry. They even found traces of arsenic in her hair. Her history of using the poison for insurance fraud established a clear criminal pattern. Still, the court never officially established a motive, which is almost unheard of in a death penalty case. Hayashi was hauled in on October 4, 1998, initially on fraud charges, before facing the music on December 10, 2002. Judge Ikuo Ogawa spent 7 grueling hours reading the 200-page verdict that sentenced her to die. The Osaka High Court upheld it in 2005. The Supreme Court finally closed the book on April 21, 2009. But the story is far from over. That Spring 8 analysis, the backbone of the prosecution's case, has been hit with major backlash. In 2012, a professor from Kyoto University, Junko, publicly tore the data apart. A 2015 peer-reviewed study even suggested that the forensic data wasn't nearly enough to definitively pin this on her. Since then, 3 separate petitions for a retrial have been filed. The third one, from June 2021, was brought by lawyer Tuo Ueda, a former high court judge himself. That makes him a very unusual advocate for death row. That petition is still hanging there in 2025. In Japan, they call the retrial system the door that never opens. Only 5 death row inmates have ever been granted a retrial since the war ended, though all 5 were eventually found innocent. Hayashi has been behind bars for over 26 years now, making her one of the longest-serving prisoners in the country. Her husband Kenji, now 79, and using a wheelchair after a brain hemorrhage, continues to fight for her alongside their son, Kuji. Is the evidence that convicted her actually broken? Or is she exactly where she is supposed to be? The Hayashi case haunted the community for decades, but our next suspect operated somewhere people go to feel safe, a hospital ward, and she turned that trust into a nightmare that absolutely nobody saw coming. Ayumi Kuboki. In the summer of 2016, something dark was happening on the 4th floor of Oguchi Hospital in Yokohama. The ward was for elderly patients with dementia, people who were completely dependent on their nurses for every single thing. For weeks, the staff had been noticing a wave of very strange incidents. They found personal belongings that had been riddled with needle punctures. Nurses' uniforms were found slashed open, and drinks were spiked with mysterious chemicals. Then, patients started dying at a rate that defied all logic. Between July and September of 2016, 48 patients on that one ward alone lost their lives. The numbers were unreal, far beyond anything the hospital had ever seen before. The investigation finally caught a major break in September of 2016. One nurse happened to drop an IV bag and saw it foaming in a really strange way. They started looking closer and found about 10 bags with tiny needle pricks right in the filters. Somebody was pumping a foreign substance into the drips, keeping these patients alive. Lab tests eventually identified the mystery liquid, benzalkonium chloride. In Japan, it goes by the brand name Diamel. It's a common disinfectant used in hospitals. You could find the stuff just sitting around on every single floor of the building. But who actually had the access to do this? And more importantly, why? Investigators tore through the clothes and gear of every staff member on that ward. The evidence pointed one way. They found traces of Diamel in only one place, the pockets of a single nurse's uniform. That nurse was Ayumi Kuboki. Born in 1987, she got her license in 2008 and joined the hospital in mid-2015. Her station? The 4th floor ward. Once they showed her what they had, she didn't fight it. She just admitted to everything. And honestly, what she told them was beyond messed up. Over just 4 days in September 2016, Kuboki used a tiny needle to spike IV bags with that disinfectant. 3 deaths were officially linked to her. 78-year-old Isayo Kitsu passed away around September 15th or 16th. An 88-year-old named Sozo Nishikawa was the next to go. Then came Nobuo Yamaki, also 88, found dead in that same hospital room only 2 days later. She also faced 5 counts for prepping other bags, thankfully. They caught those before they were ever given to patients. After the cops cuffed her, Kuboki admitted she'd actually hit around 20 people. But since most were already cremated, the forensic evidence was gone, leaving only 3 chargeable murders. What was she even thinking? The reason she gave the police was something no one saw coming. She claimed she was just terrified of having to talk to grieving families when someone died on her watch. So she timed the poisoning so they'd die while she was off the clock. That way, her co-workers had to deal with the fallout. A psychiatrist named Tamami Katada thinks there's more to it. Maybe some deep-seated bitterness toward her bosses or the other nurses. By causing chaos on someone else's shift, she was basically sabotaging their careers and creating a massive scandal for them. The arrest finally happened on July 7th, 2018. That's nearly 2 full years after they first found those tampered bags. The trial finally kicked off at the Yokohama District Court on October 1st, 2021. The judges took her autism spectrum disorder into account, looking at it as a reason for some leniency. They basically agreed she wasn't cut out for nursing and that her extreme anxiety was just too much for her to handle. But even so, they ruled she was legally sane. She knew exactly what she was doing. On November 9th, 2021, Judge Kazunori Kare gave her life instead of death, citing her remorse and possible rehabilitation. The families? They were absolutely crushed by that verdict. Everyone appealed, but on June 19th, 2024, the High Court stuck with the life sentence, making it official in July. When 48 people die on one ward in 3 months, you have to wonder, how many of those were actually natural, and how many were just the result of one woman and a needle? Kuboki completely trashed the trust people put in their healthcare workers. But wait until you hear about this next case in Tottori. A bar hostess left a path of ruin, and the bodies kept floating up. On October 7th, 2009, they found Hideki Maruyama, a 57-year-old shop owner, face down in the Mani River. The water was barely 20 centimeters deep, but his system was loaded with sleeping pills. His GPS history showed he'd been visiting the same house over and over right before he died. 6 months earlier, on April 11th of that same year, the body of Kazumi Yabi, a 47-year-old trucker, was found floating off the coast of Hokue, Tottori. Detectives found sedatives in his system again, but the real shocker was sand in his lungs, totally impossible for someone who simply drowned in the open sea. Both victims shared one thing in common, and both were deep in the hole for money linked to her. Her name was Miyuki Ueda. Born in 1973 in Kurayoshi, she made her living as a snack bar hostess at a little dive called Club J in downtown Tottori. Twice divorced and a mother of 5. She lived in a cramped, dirt-cheap apartment for only 25,000 yen, about $250 a month. 7 people, plus a small army of cats and dogs, were squeezed into that tiny space. She was absolutely drowning in debt. Investigators eventually dug up 16 separate counts of fraud. All told, she'd swindled roughly 9.22 million yen in various goods. Inside her place, cops found a massive stash of sleeping pills and medical reference books detailing exactly how to handle dosage levels. Her methods followed a terrifyingly consistent pattern. She'd slip sleeping pills into food or drinks, wait for the target to black out, and then stage the bodies in water so it looked like a tragic accident. Yabi, that truck driver, had taken out 2 million yen in loans just to give to Ueda. By then, she owed him closer to 2.7 million. Before he actually died, Yabi had already dodged death twice after eating meals she'd fixed for him. He crashed his rig once after falling asleep at the wheel and passed out on a heated table right before a fire started on another occasion. He barely made it out with his life both times. But the third time, in the water off Hokue, his luck ran out. Maruyama, that electronics shop owner, had the same kind of money ties. Ueda owed him around 1.4 million yen. Were there others? Investigators were convinced. Akira Shimino, a 42-year-old journalist and Ueda's boyfriend, was struck and killed by a train back in May of 2004. They found him wearing a cardboard box on his head, with a handwritten note about Ueda inside. He had major money issues involving her too. But here's the thing, no autopsy was ever performed on him. Then there was Shinichi Furuta, a 27-year-old guard from the bar. He drowned in August of 2007 right after Ueda moved in. Word is he couldn't even swim, and Ueda was reportedly burning him with scalding water on a regular basis. A cop named Hiroyuki Sakai, a regular at her bar, was found hanging in February of 2008. He had heavy financial ties to Ueda too. And yet another man, Kazumi Taguchi, 58, was living in her apartment when he passed in October of 2009. Same sleeping agents found in his system. How many lives did she actually take? Ueda was booked for fraud on November 2nd, 2009, then finally charged with the murders in early 2010. Her trial lasted 75 days. It was the second longest in Japanese history at the time, and they convicted her based entirely on circumstantial evidence. Sentenced to death on December 4th, 2012. Higher courts upheld it in 2014 and 2017, but she'd never see the gallows. The Supreme Court finalized the sentence in July of 2017, but fate had other plans for Ueda. Around 4:20 p.m. on January 14, 2023, she started choking on her lunch while eating alone in her cell at Hiroshima. Guards tried to clear her airway, but she lost consciousness and they just couldn't bring her back. She was rushed to a nearby hospital but pronounced dead by 6:55 that night. She was 49 years old. We might never know the real body count, but the list of men who died after crossing her path tells the whole story, confession or not. If you're still here and like these deep dives into true crime, hit subscribe and ring that bell. Ueda was a lone wolf, picking off men one by one from across a bar counter. But this next case? It's about a woman who led a whole cult and used a much darker power to kill behind closed doors. Sachiko Ito. July 5th, 1995. Police in Fukushima raided a house in the city of Sukagawa. What they found inside was pure nightmare fuel. 6 mummified, rotting corpses scattered throughout the house. They were all followers of the woman living there. She'd convinced the others that their souls hadn't left, that they might just wake up once the bodies finished rotting away. So they just left the bodies exactly where they dropped. The woman pulling all the strings was Sachiko Ito. Born in 1947 in Fukushima, Ito spent decades living a completely quiet, ordinary life. She married a guy she'd known since high school, peddling cosmetics door to door while her husband worked as a painter. 1990 changed everything. Her husband's back gave out, he quit working, and then the drinking and gambling debts started piling up. Seeking help, they turned to a religious cult, where Ito quickly spiraled into an obsession with faith healing. Eventually, she started telling people she was actually a god with the divine power to banish demons. Around 1992, her husband just vanished. Even now, nobody really knows what happened to that man. Ito settled in Sukagawa, attracting a loyal following. Soon, more than a dozen of them were living in her house. People nearby complained about the endless drumming and chanting at all hours, plus all the cars clogging the street. When a neighbor spoke up about the noise, Ito allegedly threatened to hypnotize her until her hands and feet went numb. Behind those closed doors, Ito had created a private kingdom where her word was absolute law. If you questioned her, you were labeled possessed. Her fix? A brutal exorcism ritual. She told followers they were full of evil spirits and forced them to undergo what she called purification. The ritual was simple. She'd beat people with thick drumsticks while chanting for hours on end. She claimed she was cleansing their souls by breaking their bodies. The victims suffered terrible internal injuries, torn organs, massive internal bleeding, and total physical collapse. Between December 1994 and June 1995, 6 followers were beaten to death this way. The dead included 50-year-old Mamoru Miki, his wife Kazuko, their teenage daughter Sato, Kazuko's sister Kimiko, 42-year-old Tatsuo Eigai, and 27-year-old Ami Senzaki. A 7th victim actually survived and made it to a hospital. That's what finally tipped off the police. So, why did she pick these specific people? The reasons changed every time, though jealousy was usually at the top of the list. Edo was obsessed with a follower 27 years younger than her. When another woman caught his eye, it was over. Edo claimed she was possessed and ordered a 3-day beating to save her. Money mattered too. If you wouldn't lend her cash, you were suddenly impure. It was all about control. If you even looked like you doubted her powers, you were the next one on the mat. Edo's own daughter Yuko helped her out and ended up getting a life sentence for it. Nimoto got 18 years, while another follower, Mitsuo, got life even though he helped kill his own wife, Kimiko. On May 10th, 2002, the judge handed Edo a death sentence, ruling that systematically killing followers isn't a religious act. Her appeal was tossed out by the High Court on November 12, 2005. By September 16, 2008, the Supreme Court made her death sentence official. To the very end, Edo insisted she was just performing a service and never meant for anyone to die. On September 27, 2012, Sachiko Edo was hanged at Miyagi Prison. She was 65. She was the first woman executed in Japan in 15 years, and only the 4th since 1950. How does a regular saleswoman become a monster who orders people to beat each other to death in God's name? Edo used faith as a weapon to dominate everyone in that house. But our next case features a couple whose business was built on a much darker kind of loyalty. When customers started asking questions, they simply stopped coming home. This is the story of Hiroko Kazama. In April 1993, a 39-year-old executive named Akio hopped into a car with a man named Gen Sakin. Akio had dropped 11 million yen on 2 dogs from Sekin's kennel. But things weren't as they seemed. He'd figured out the dogs were overpriced mutts and he wasn't happy about it. He wanted a refund. But inside that car, someone handed him a drink. He blacked out immediately and never woke up. They never found his body in one piece. Sitting right there next to Sekine was Hiroko Kazama, born in 1957 in Saitama. Kazama was studying to be a land surveyor when she visited Africa Kennel in 1983 and met Gen Sakin. She became wife number 4 of an eventual 7. To show her loyalty, she had a dragon tattooed across her back. Sakin was a famous dog breeder who was basically the guy responsible for making huskies and malamutes popular in Japan. But behind the public face, he was deeply involved with organized crime, specifically the Inagawa Kai syndicate. He claimed a lion in Africa bit his pinky off, but it was actually chopped off because of some unpaid debts. He lived by 5 personal rules. Rule number 1, make sure the bodies of your victims completely vanish. Africa Kennel was just a front. They sold overpriced dogs by promising buyers huge returns on breeding that never happened. When people wanted their money back or debts came due, Sakin and Kazama turned to a more permanent solution. They used capsules filled with strychnine to paralyze their targets quietly. Then, they hauled the remains to an accomplice's remote spot in Gunma Prefecture, a remodeled freight car hidden in thick woods belonging to Ako Yamazaki. Once there, they dismembered the bodies and burned the bones inside large metal drums. Ashes were dumped in rivers near O's National Park. Kawasaki became the first confirmed victim on April 20th, 1993. 3 months later, on July 21st, a mob boss named Yasutoshi Endo arrived with his driver, Susumu Wakui. Endo had been pressuring Sakin about what really happened to the missing Kawasaki. Both men were served drinks that were spiked with lethal strychnine. The driver, Wakui, was just an innocent man caught in the middle, He fought the poison so violently his convulsions cracked the windshield before dying. Kazama reportedly hummed traditional songs while they were getting rid of the bodies afterward. On August 26th, a 54-year-old housewife named Mitsu Seguchi became the couple's fourth victim. Her son worked at the Kennel, and she'd paid Seiken 9 million yen for 6 Alaskan Malamutes she never actually got. This fourth murder was blamed solely on Seiken. Kazama actually wasn't convicted for this specific case. The whole operation collapsed in December 1994 when Yamazaki cracked under questioning and led investigators to those remote disposal sites. Seiken and Kazama were finally hauled in by the police on January 5, 1995. The trial that followed was absolutely massive. 105 sessions over 5 years. On March 21, 2001, the court sentenced both of them to death. Kazama became only the 12th woman sentenced to hang in Japan since the end of World War II. The Tokyo High Court upheld the sentences in 2005, and the Supreme Court finalized everything on June 5, 2009. Kazama was the CEO of Africa Kennel and had even faked a divorce from Seiken to dodge her taxes. Prosecutors argued this proved she wasn't just some submissive wife following orders. She was a full-blown business partner in every part of the operation. Jen Seiken died of organ failure at 75 while sitting in the Tokyo detention house back in 2017. As of 2025, Kazama has spent 25 years on death row, still insisting that she is completely innocent. That claim is backed by Yamazaki, who wrote a book saying Seiken bullied them both into taking part in the crimes. The story inspired the movie Cold Fish, though the filmmakers swapped the dog kennel setting for a tropical fish shop. Was she a cold-blooded partner, or just another victim of a man who knew how to make problems disappear? The Kazama case was about a couple acting in tandem. But this next case takes that dynamic to a terrifying extreme that prosecutors called absolutely incomparable in Japan's entire criminal history. On March 6, 2002, a teenage girl walked into a police station and described the absolute hell she'd survived for nearly 8 years. She'd been kept captive since roughly 1994 by a man named Futoshi Matsunaga and his partner, Junko Ogata. The girl's story launched an investigation into what the courts would later call a case with no equal in Japanese criminal records. 7 people had been murdered, yet not a single body was ever found. Junko Ogata was born in Kurume, Fukuoka, in 1962 to a very wealthy family. People who knew her described her as gentle, a kind woman who worked at a preschool. Around October 1982, she started seeing Futoshi Matsunaga, a master manipulator who quickly began breaking her down mentally and physically. When Ogata's mother, Shizumi, tried to intervene in 1984, Matsunaga struck back. By 1985, following a staged suicide attempt, Ogata was entirely under his control. He used electric shocks from stun guns, plus starvation, isolation, and forced crimes to keep an absolute grip on everyone in his circle. Experts later compared his tactics to those of cult leaders. By 1992, Matsunaga had scammed 180 million yen. Both he and Ogata were eventually placed on Japan's most wanted list. Between 1996 and 98, 7 people tied to them died inside these tiny apartments Matsunaga controlled in Kitakushu, over in the Fukuoka prefecture. The first victim, Kumio Teraya, was 34. His teenage daughter would eventually escape and blow the whistle on the whole nightmare. He was kept prisoner and tortured for a long time using stun devices. Matsunaga even brainwashed the girl into thinking she was the one who killed her own father. It was a sick way to keep her silent through a sense of overwhelming guilt. What came next was a wave of horror hitting Ogata's own family. In December 1997, Ogata's 61-year-old father, Takashi, died with Matsunaga, forcing Junko herself to take part in the act. In January 1998, Ogata's mother, Shizumi, was targeted. Matsunaga ordered the other prisoners to do it. She was 58. Next was Ogata's sister, Reiko, who was only 33. Reiko's husband, Kazuya, was 38. He was locked in a bathroom and starved until he simply passed away. 2 younger children in the family also died under Matsunaga's orders. Every single body was dismembered, boiled, and then either flushed down the drain or dumped into the sea. During the investigation, the police never found even a single piece of identifiable human remains. The girl who finally escaped on March 6, 2002, had been held for about 8 years. She walked into a station and told them everything. The pair was arrested the next day. On September 28, 2005, the Fukuoka District Court sentenced them to death. But on September 26, 2007, a massive high court ruling would change the face of Japanese criminal law. They kept Matsunaga's sentence, but commuted Ogata's to life in prison. They realized Matsunaga's psychological grip was so total that she reached a state where resisting or saying no was basically impossible. The Supreme Court finalized it on December 12, 2011. After a lot of debate among the justices, Justice Tomoyuki Yoko disagreed strongly, arguing that a life sentence for so many deaths would completely ruin any sense of fair punishment. Regardless, the majority upheld it, setting a precedent that the death penalty can be avoided if the defendant was under extreme coercive control. Matsunaga is still on death row at the Fukuoka jail. Ogata is serving life. The case even inspired Sion Sono's 2019 Netflix film, The Forest of Love. Where does force end and personal choice begin? Can someone be a cold-blooded killer and a victim at once? The Ogata case proved how one person can literally break another's will through sheer psychological force. But the last case today takes that whole idea even further. We're talking about a woman who dismantled entire families from the inside for decades. Miyoko Sumida. In November 2011, a woman in her 40s escaped a house in Amagasaki and went to the cops. Her story kicked off one of the biggest and most complicated crime investigations in Japanese history. Over the following months, investigators found body after body, some in concrete drums, others under floorboards or hidden in harbors and remote sheds. At the center was 63-year-old Miyoko Sumida. The scale of what she'd done stretched back over 25 years. Born in 1948 in Amagasaki, Sumida grew up in a house ruined by her father's gambling addiction. It was a cold environment, completely empty of any real warmth. Even as a kid, she was icy and manipulative. No friends, and plenty of time in juvenile hall for fighting. She controlled and scared her classmates by lying about her father having deep ties to the Yakuza. As an adult, she lived big in a 75-square-meter penthouse. It was supposedly filled with 200 million yen in high-end decor, all funded by shaking down families for insurance and pension money. Detectives had never seen anything quite like the playbook Sumida used. No poison, no knives, just decades of straight-up mental warfare and cruel mind games. She was cold about it, using a tiny argument or a small debt to worm her way into a family's life. She used threats to slowly take total command of whole households. Marriages and adoptions were forced onto them. These fake legal ties gave her the keys to their bank accounts, their homes, and even their freedom to move. Her captives were literally locked in storage sheds on apartment balconies. We are talking about 500 milliliters of water and 1 bowl of noodles daily, plus only 2 bathroom trips allowed. Beaten, starving, and kept awake, she basically broke them until they literally died. The worst part? She made them hurt one another. That guilt built a wall that kept anyone from trying to escape. We know at least 8 people died, but that number might actually be as high as 11. It started back around 1987, when Yoshiko Hashimoto went missing. They never found a trace of her. Then, in July 2005, 51-year-old Hayashi Sumida was found at a cliff base in Okinawa, looking like an accident. That accident netted Sumida 90 million yen in insurance payouts. November 2011 saw a 66-year-old Kazuka Wei's body discovered inside a drum filled with concrete. 29-year-old Maro Nakushima was discovered under the floorboards, dead from being starved and abused for a long time. They also pulled 71-year-old Mitsuer Ando and 68-year-old Takashi Tanimoto from under those floorboards. His family was fleeced for 16 million yen. Meanwhile, 53-year-old Jiro Hashimoto was found in a concrete drum in Hinas Harbor. Plus, 88-year-old Nori Miniyoshi, missing since 2003. He turned up in a farm shed in late 2012. 3 others are still gone. November 26, 2011. That is when Sumida and 7 others got cuffed for dumping bodies. Things just snowballed over the next year as police started finding more and more bodies. In the end, 17 people were picked up, and 11 of them faced formal charges. Sumida's group reached into at least 3 other families, and police are convinced that the true scale of her influence might never come to light. But the mastermind behind it all would never actually stand trial. On December 12, 2012, only a week after her murder charge, Sumida used a long-sleeved shirt to hang herself in a cell at the Hyogo police headquarters. They had her on suicide watch, and guards saw her nodding off at 6 that morning. By 6:10, she was gone. She was 64 years old. Nobody came for her ashes. Her partner in crime, Lee Masanori, got life behind bars. 6 others got between 15 and 23 years, but because Sumida is dead, the complete story of Japan's most twisted case will never be told. That is the story for today. Thanks for sticking around. Click here to see what else we have got.